The dog does what he wants.
Hello, welcome to this extra special Reclaim the Frame conversation around the glorious film CRIP CAMP, courtesy of Netflix, with two very special US filmmakers who are here in the frame, as you can see, and a fellow activist and filmmaker from the UK. And we are marking the start of UK Disability History Month. I'd also like to welcome everyone, and particularly our hard of hearing and deaf audience members. We have Alison and Sarah signing for us here, and live captions too. So just so you know who I am, my name is Mia Bays, and I run Bird's Eye View, and we are 17 years young as a charity. We see ourselves as cultural activists, specifically lifting up the work of female filmmakers. First, we started life as a film festival, and now we're a year-round mission. And the name of that mission is Reclaim the Frame, and we spotlight films that are written or directed or co-directed by women, or based on a book or a story by a woman, or screenwritten by a woman. And we are industry insiders. We bring out our privilege and our influence to bear and to effect change. We are not for profit. We invest in the releases of the film. So a film like CRIP CAMP, we've been working with Netflix to bring ever greater audiences to this film. We work in cinemas and online. At the moment, all of our beautiful cinemas are closed. It's important to see films at home too, and thank God for Netflix, frankly, at the moment, because we're in our second lockdown here in the UK. And we have networks across the country, so we work in every nation and region, and delighted to be here to discuss CRIP CAMP. So I'd like to first of all welcome the film's directors, James LeBrecht, who attended the camp, which is the centerpiece of the film, and who has gone on to a career in sound, in theatre and movies, and works on some amazing other documentaries, Minding the Gap, We Were Here, The Devil and Daniel Johnson, The Rape of Europa, and this is his directorial debut, so welcome him to you. And Nicole, who co-directed The Rape of Europa, is the other filmmaker at the helm of CRIP CAMP. Nicole is an Emmy winner for producing short film Collisions, and previously a double nominee for The Rape of Europa, and for co-directing features The Revolutionary Optimists and Sent Home, both by independent lens. And last but not least, I would like to welcome Lindsey Dryden to this conversation. Lindsey is an Emmy-winning producer and director and writer, founder of Little by Little Films, which prioritizes bold new storytelling by and about LGBTQ+ folks, women, and deaf and disabled people. As a queer filmmaker with a disability, she brings an authentic, rarely seen perspectives. And Lindsey produced the extraordinary Sundance Special Jury Award winner Unrest, and produced Trans in America, and is a founding member of Queer Producers Network and FWD Doc, Filmmakers with Disabilities, also with Jim. So first of all, welcome to everyone. We're all coming from different, this is a genuinely transatlantic conversation. So Jim and Nicole, where are you patching in from?
I'm in Oakland, California, right down the road from Jim.
Yeah, I'm just up the hill.
And Lindsey, you're in the wilds of the UK.
I am. I'm in the West Country in the middle of nowhere.
Welcome to everyone. So let's start with the origin story. So actually, Nicole and Jim, let's start with how did you get into film? It's always nice to hear that before we then talk about the specifics of the movie that we all watched and loved. Nicole.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I was actually a subject in a documentary film when I was in high school. I was part of a peer counseling program. It was sort of an experimental program for young people to try to identify the kids that the other kids confided in and talked to anyway, and train them to kind of do intervention and counseling. And they took us all on a big retreat, and I met a film crew, and the film crew became friends with me and a teacher that I was friends with in the school. And so invited us into the edit room, invited us to the premiere. I saw myself on television, and I was really captivated by thinking of that. I guess it was sort of the experience of watching the kind of genuine intensity of their interest in the story and their attachment to it, and the fact that they were sort of following us over time and kind of holding our story in their hearts the way they did, that was really intriguing to me. I thought I couldn't really believe that that was an actual job. And then I actually ended up in London somehow after college, kind of working in the art world, and became kind of disenchanted with the extent to which the art world was about money, which was naive of me to think that it was, not going to be about that, and remembered that, and also had seen The Times of Harvey Milk, the documentary film, when I was in college, and had kind of this idea in my mind of San Francisco as a place where people made films like that, and so migrated out to the Bay Area and started trying to make independent documentary films, and also working in television in the UK actually to pay my bills. So yeah, that's how it started.
Wonderful. Jim, we know some of your origin story because quite a bit of it is covered in CRIP Camp. But for those people who haven't necessarily seen the film, just little, or anything you want to add that maybe the film doesn't cover.
Well, I've had a career in sound ever since I was in college. Actually, in high school, to be honest with you. And I remember very vividly to this day that in 1985, I went to a lecture on how they did the sound for the movie Amadeus. And the film was produced by Saul Zaentz, who had a wonderful facility in Berkeley. And I'm sitting there as a theater sound designer and thinking, I'm doing all of this in theater, Foley and voiceover recordings and editing like that. And I talked to somebody. I was bold and went up and talked to one of the people there and asked if I could talk to them about film. And she was just lovely, and she became my fairy godmother in the film industry. And so that really led me to Saul Zaentz's facility, where at the age of 33, I was an intern on a movie, on a sound crew. And I've just managed to kind of work my way up in the business and started my own business, audio post-production company, in 1996. And found an incredible home in the documentary community, which is so rich, so lovely, so invigorating in the Bay Area.
Wonderful. And Lindsey, can you say a bit about your connection to this conversation, actually, because you and Jim are somewhat linked by a passion for documentary. So a little bit more about your origin story, please.
Indeed, sure. I feel really lucky to be here, to be honest, alongside Jim and Nicole, because they've made this extraordinary film, and it's a real pleasure to sort of help to celebrate it. So thank you for having me this evening. So Jim and I met on a film called Unrest. He did an extraordinary job with the sound and was a really important creative member of our team. And actually Unrest was a film where we had several heads of department with disabilities, which I think is still pretty unusual in the doc space and beyond. And so 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, the International Documentary Association convened, there's an event called Getting Real that happens every 2 years, typically in Los Angeles. And they hosted the first ever convening of disabled filmmakers. And for the first time, many deaf and disabled filmmakers, many of whom may not have acknowledged or disclosed their experience to other people, we found ourselves in a room for the first time. And, with the leadership of Jim, began a conversation about what work we could do together after that extraordinary, moving, galvanizing, exciting, surprising event. What work could we do, and what did we need to do in the documentary industry and beyond to think about, how deaf and disabled filmmakers and deaf and disabled representation in media, how we could address that for the better. So we, along with Dayal Mohammed and Alyssa Namias, who are both filmmakers and advocates and extraordinary people too, the four of us co-founded Forward Doc, which is about creating opportunities for networks for, and frankly, a better future for filmmakers with disabilities, and also I think audiences. It's long overdue that we see what is at least in the UK, 1 in 5 people has a disability in the UK, but we aren't seeing 1 in 5 characters in films represented with disabilities. We're certainly not seeing 1 in 5 people in the film industry making editorial decisions and having storytelling power represented, and that's sort of what we're aiming for.
So let's cover the origin story of the film. How did you begin to realize this story had to be told and was a feature film? And how did you two meet, Jim and Nicole?
Well, I've had the pleasure to have worked with Nicole on her previous feature-length documentaries as her sound mixer and sound designer. Going back to Set in Stone, which I'm getting the times now conflated, but 20, 25 years ago, I've been sitting there kind of mixing lots of documentaries and seeing films around disability, either that I'm mixing or out in the world, and not really seeing the kind of film that I think that was really in our own voice. And I took Nicole out to lunch. She was just wrapping up The Revolutionary Optimist, and I'm like pitching her ideas about maybe different films that maybe she'd be interested in making. And, they were all, okay, but literally just kind of going back out of the restaurant to the parking lot, I kind of sheepishly said, I've always wanted to see a documentary about the summer camp I went to. There was this exodus of people from the New York area out to Berkeley, and I think there's a connection to the disabled civil rights movement.
I think, for a lot of us documentary filmmakers, we can probably remember where we were standing and what the day was like when we heard this, the story that kind of captured our heart and drove us to dedicate years of our lives to trying to bring it to fruition and actually see it on the screen. And I can completely remember that moment when Jim told me about his camp. And I remember actually rolling my eyes a little bit, because I just feel like a lot of people have this precious memory of their own summer camp experience. And it seems like it was so powerful and fundamental to them, which it was to them, but not everybody's camp deserves to be, a feature-length documentary film. But when Jim started describing Jeanette to me, I realized something was happening to me, which was that the images he was painting in my mind of this kind of, wild utopian hippie community where there was this egalitarian spirit between campers and counselors in the early 70s, kind of in the full, flowering of the summer of love and the civil rights movement and all the things that were going on at the time. It was challenging a lot of pre-held conceptions that I had about disability history, about disability community. And that was why I was excited about working with Jim, was because in the working with Jim as my sound mixer and sound designer over 20 years, I had come to know Jim as kind of a portal into understanding disability from a different perspective, understanding it as culture, understanding it as a civil rights issue. And so I was excited about kind of trying to explore that in film. And the more I thought about, also I'm a total, history geek, and I love nothing more than a movement story, and especially one that deserves to be better known. So the idea of tying this like incredibly personal, intimate, emotional experience of adolescence in summer camp, with a movement story that included this radical, incredible sit-in was deeply exciting to me. But the more I thought about it, the most exciting thing was Jim. The most exciting thing was that here you have this person who lived this history, and could help us see it through the eyes of someone with that lived experience. So thank God I went back to Jim and said, would you consider co-directing this with me? And he said yes. And And we didn't have the footage of the camp at the time, so we started trying to figure out how would we bring people into the world of the camp, you know.
What for each of you was the biggest challenge in making this film? Jim, let's start with you.
Wow. Well, I mean, I think that probably the biggest challenge is, well, I know that we really talked long and hard about really making sure that it didn't feel like it was two separate films, that it wasn't just a film about camp and then just a film about the fight for disability rights, and how these two things would come together and interweave. And so we found our footing for sure, I think.
I think, you know, for me, I mean, a challenge was always trying to remind myself to stay in a very learning stance, and to really be guided by, to keep the sort of like compass needle of, you know, Jim's experience and knowledge as kind of the true north, and to not to not sort of just slide into kind of the usual way of presenting something. And we would sometimes have things that just maybe didn't feel quite right to Jim, but maybe Jim himself didn't even really know why. And to build our entire team in such a way as that we were all saying like, okay, we have to figure out why, you know, we have to keep trying. We kept having screenings with disability community. We would caption, you know, and audio describe cuts during the editing process so that we could show them to folks, so that we could get back other impressions from people with disabilities. And just like, you know, so, and really accepting that like the film was not going to be done until we had a film that people responded to as kind of, yes, that's the authentic experience. And sometimes things that we would do that I think in another film would be great, would actually, we would discover would bump people's minds over into kind of like an inspiration porn way of seeing the story, or kind of like, oh God, tragedy. And we were always trying to figure out what were ways that we could avoid that, you know? And what we ended up discovering was sort of our secret sauce was emotional complexity, you know? So we were going a lot for sort of you're laughing through your tears kind of a feeling, you know, things that were so complex that they could feel true and authentic. And because I think, unfortunately, a lot of people's brains have been worn down by, or just co-opted by the kind of very, the paucity of authentic disability representation and the kind of tropes that the media serves up.
And Lindsey, this is a good time to bring you in. I would like to ask, and for you actually to ask Jim and Nicole, or to certainly converse with Jim and Nicole about what this film means to you and the community of filmmakers that you're all part of, but also in terms of on-screen representation as well.
Ooh, it's a big question. I mean, Jim will hopefully be comfortable with me saying this, because I say this to him on the phone all the time. You know, this film, I think, is genuinely affecting people in our community every single day, because it's giving us the opportunity to feel hopeful, to feel that there aren't just filmmakers telling authentic stories that are rich and nuanced and complicated and funny and difficult and messy and joyful all at the same time, but also that there are film funders and distributors who are really passionate about doing that as well. And I think there are certainly, you know, there isn't a lack of talent, and there isn't a lack of incredible ideas from deaf and disabled filmmakers. but there has historically been a sort of lack of nuance, I think, in how and if those stories are even allowed to be told. So, you know, CRIP CAMP is such an extraordinary milestone for viewers and for anybody, I think, in the deaf and disabled community, but particularly for filmmakers in how we think about the stories that we want to tell going forward, and that we frankly will be allowed to tell and resourced to tell as a result of CRIP CAMP. I think it really is that significant a move forward for industry and for cinema.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's an incredible feeling, just to sit here and hear you say that, honestly, because that was definitely our dream, you know. And I think as we became aware that the platform we were going to have was growing, you know, as we partnered with Higher Ground and with Netflix and realized we would have, you know, this sort of global platform, the feeling of responsibility around that kind of, you know, increased. And so that was definitely our cherished goal. So thank you for saying that, Lindsey.
I have to say that it's been kind of an extraordinary experience to get a sense of the impact that our film is having, and I think that perhaps it has shown the kind of the gatekeepers that there's a way of making films around disability that aren't stuck in the old tropes that Nicole was talking about, and you know what I'm seeing online as I read things from folks, and I saw something really wonderful today again on Instagram. I think that we're all looking for this day in which people with disabilities are in films, not because of their disability, but because we are a part of society, part of the fabric of life. And that's the world I'm really shooting for, hoping that we can see. But that's not going to happen, or it's not going to happen very quickly, if we are not in a position of being producers and writers and directors. So I just think, as I've been looking at all of this, I think it's the responsibility of the entertainment community or business to really look upon us, understand that actually we are a culture, we are a cohesive group of people, and that we have a great deal of pride in there. And if CRIP CAMP shows you anything, there's incredible stories out there that aren't the same old. So, you know, that's what I'm shooting for.
We go back to the actual making of the film and the incredible archive. So, Nicole, you referred to the point where you didn't know that the archive existed. But talk us through what impact the discovery of that had.
You know, Jim had mentioned that there was this tape floating around called the Crabs tape. That this, you know, Radical Video Coalition had stopped by the camp and had shot this story that ended up on Manhattan cable television, you know, about this crabs outbreak at the camp, and it cracked me up because Jim would say his dad would call him from college and say, "Hey, Jim, your crabs tape was on again, you know, last night." So that was exciting to know that there was that footage out there, but obviously we couldn't make an entire documentary about a crabs outbreak. And so Jim said, I think I remember that they strapped the porta-pack on the back of my wheelchair and handed me the camera, and I think I filmed a tour of the camp. And I was like, oh my God, you know, okay, now every single night I'm up until 1 a.m. looking, you know, online, trying to figure out who was this group and how could we track them down, and was there any possibility they still had this old, you know, video footage. And finally found a tiny little ad for the Crabs tape with the name of the group, the People's Video Theater, in the back of a magazine. And it turned out that you know, one of the members of the People's Video Theater, Howard Gutstadt, was on the board of a, you know, anarchist bookstore in San Francisco, just a few miles away from where we live, and had all the footage and was midway through transferring it as part of a National Endowment for the Humanities grant to digital, and so was very, very excited about cooperating with us. And all of a sudden, we had the way to bring people into the camp and have them experience kind of the feeling of summer camp and coming into community with the people in the film, for themselves. It changed the game completely.
And Jim, anything to add? Because that you had a personal connection to that. So it's also quite exposing this archive somewhat.
Well, I mean, it was just thrilling to actually know that it existed and that we would have access to it. But certainly, there was a day that we got this hard drive that showed up, and Nicole opened up this hard drive with these 5.5 hours worth of videos. It was like looking back at a time capsule. It was just, and very, very bittersweet experience for me. And very excited that we had this, that we're going to be able to work with this and look at all these great moments here that are so important, but also seeing friends that have passed and kind of, missing them. But I eventually kind of felt like, I got to go back to camp again by working on the film. And wasn't I a lucky boy?
Lindsey, I'll hand to you to ask a question now.
I'm really enjoying hearing the Londonness of your train in the background. I think that's what it is, and it feels like being in Vauxhall. It's brilliant. I wanted to ask about that process of telling a story that is so personal. I mean, obviously, you've developed a co-directing relationship that's incredibly supportive, very transparent. But I wondered if you could talk a bit about what it means to tell a story that you're a part of, that brings up some vulnerabilities for you, that represents you in lots of different ways, and how would you recommend that filmmakers on similar journeys navigate that and take care of themselves?
The key to all of this is trust, and that Nicole and I crafted an extraordinary, truly the best collaboration I'll ever have in my life. And because we had known each other, and I held her work in very high regard, but that she had known me and held me, that knew that I was a dedicated person to my craft, that there's a certain amount of trust right there. But to be able to really talk about very intimate things in my life, I knew that if there was something that I felt later I was uncomfortable about, we could talk about it, and that I had final choice on that. But it really was this belief that that everybody working on our film, especially in the editing room, I could just really trust them to do the right thing. And that I held everybody's work and their talent in such high regard. So that being, I had an opportunity to be very open. And this may sound incredibly silly to you, but I keep on, I kind of keep on thinking of Otis Redding. Otis Redding was the soul singer from the 1960s, out of the South. He did Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. And one of my favorite performances I've ever seen of him was at the Monterey Pop Festival. That man left nothing in the dressing room, And I felt like, Jim, you got this one shot here to really just lay it all out. All those things you wanted people to understand. And it's going to get into your body. It's going to get into sex. It's going to get into how you feel. But that, I just felt like I had no other choice. That I wanted I knew that we wanted to make this a great film. And so just go for it. So how do I protect myself? I think that for me, what I'm getting back, like when Lindsay, the kind words that you said, and Mia, you wrote something really lovely on Instagram that I read this morning. And, it's those kinds of things really kind of make you go, I'm really happy, that I took the leap and it turned into something wonderful.
I sort of would love to just add something to that, if that's okay. That just thinking about what you asked previously, Mia, I think what really comes through in the film is that feeling. And it's not just precious for the people who make the film, but it's so rare for deaf and disabled people to feel safe when they watch something, because so many viewing experiences are traumatizing or humiliating or dehumanizing, because there's been a history of storytelling about disability that is about tragedy or loss or pity porn. And what really comes through in what you've just described, I think by the sound of it, for you and for the audience, is that we get to feel safe and seen and human. And particularly in the UK at the moment, I think it's been a really, really tough couple of weeks for folks here who've seen The Witches, the new film that's come out, and its representation of physical bodies and disabilities that are monstrous and that are scary. And there's a soap storyline at the moment about Down syndrome. And the power of this media when it's done badly is that it makes people feel utterly worthless. And what your film does is make people feel totally valued. And that comes from the trust that you've placed in each other and the way that you describe that. So I just wanted to add more cheers to you for that.
Thank you. When we shot the interview with Corbett O'Toole, she said, Jim, I wouldn't be talking like this if it wasn't you. I have faith that you will take what I'm talking about, and that you and Nicole, because you knew Nicole, that we would take it and do something really good with it. So we were able to instill trust in everybody that we interviewed, that we would do the right thing.
I just want to also add that, it was very hard what Jim did, and all of us in the edit room, some days, would discuss that, like, we don't really know how you're doing what you're doing, because it was so hard to, like, say in the morning, go and do a very difficult kind of very honest, narration record session, and then go away, and then come back and watch a scene that we had cut about something totally different, and try to be looking at it, as though it was a film, not your life, And there were scenes that were very important to Jim personally, and characters and things that we ended up having to cut out because of trying to streamline the story and make it great. And we were completely capable of having both these very intimate internal conversations, and then these sort of more film structure conversations. And Jim was a part of, just putting on different hats and doing all of that, even while things were very raw and difficult. I mean, like, encountering the Willowbrook scene, day after day after day. So it really is kind of a wonder to me. And I also think it has to do with disability community and the kind of culture and skill set, of kind of like feeling like it's possible for people who have very different perspectives and different experiences to come together and kind of understand each other, you know? So we even had things happen on our team while we were working where someone would start to have an issue with a family problem or a hidden disability or something like that. And we were literally relying on the kind of culture that you see the young people in Camp Jened sharing and experiencing around the table, of just like basically saying, I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes and have your experience, but I trust that you're the expert on it. And I trust that if I give you what you're saying you need in order to bring your best self here to this project, that's going to work out. And so it was really kind of like beautiful and wonderful that it almost felt like we were in conversation with the Camp Jened community, you know, and we sort of found our way to try to figure out how to make this film together, you know, sort of from that beautiful community that had been formed.
It was very important that there was never a sense of charity involved with our film, that everybody was paid for what they were doing. If people wanted to give us, I mean, we certainly applied for grants and asked people to help support the film, but, you know, you didn't ask somebody, oh, would you be our sound recordist today for free because it's a really good film and it's about the kids, you know? You know, it was really important that, you know, that we held on to that. No charity, no pity.
Question from the audience, Phil Strether. This is a key one. Can you talk about the choice of title?
Well, yeah. I mean, we really wanted a title that was really going to say something very immediately about the attitude of this film. You know, I remember being at Sundance a couple of years ago and just telling somebody, yeah, I'm working on this film about summer camp I went to for people with disabilities. And they went, oh, how wonderful. And I went, no, you got to understand, I went there because I heard I could smoke dope with the counselors. Okay? So throw that away. So, and look, I think a lot of us in the community who have disabilities here, you know, we identify politically and culturally. And one of the things that we do is we do use the word CRIP in our language, but it's a way to reclaim the word cripple. And so and in fact, I remember Corbett in the film, I've been friends with her forever now. And I remember her asking me, you know, did you go to CRIP camp? And it's like, and it took me just a second. And then I went, oh, well, it's a lot easier than saying, did you go to a summer camp for people with disabilities? And so it's shorthand. It's an indication to one another that we identify politically and culturally as disabled. But I will also say not everybody likes this. And it's a word that upsets some people.
You know, we found that to us, it was so important that we were telegraphing through the title to people. This is different. You know, this is an inside out told story. It's told through a community lens, and it's not going to be like anything else you've seen about this community. And to the extent that we came to understand that there were a lot of people who were confused by it, you know, is it okay to say that? What does that mean? Are you talking about the gang? You know, we ended up deciding that was actually the stance we wanted viewers to come to the film with, you know, is kind of a, kind of stance, not with some sort of clear expectation for what they were going to confront. And that was something we tried to weave into the filmmaking as well. We tried to have lots of moments throughout the film where we were kind of putting people back on their heels a little bit and hoping to provoke the confrontation, sort of an active stance from the viewer where they're having to confront some of their own preconceptions and bias. And so we got a lot of flack for the title choice, and we really just believed, we held on to kind of the dream that the film would come out, it would be embraced, it would help educate people about the reclamation of this word, and in so doing about the community, and that it would all work out. And sometimes I think like that I kind of can't quite believe that we had the chutzpah to stick to it, because we were questioned about it, every step along the way. But I think once we came up with the title, nothing else ever felt like it would be quite right. And it's been gratifying to see that since the film's come out, there's something in the UK called CRIP Tales that just came out, and it feels like there's hopefully it is kind of like becoming better known in mainstream culture, and that's satisfying.
We had just before the pandemic locked everything down, we had a screening at the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan, and the place was just humming with folks, and the kind of the joke going around was that the Cripperati of New York were there. And it's true. I mean, my gosh, there was a gentleman who runs the mayor's office on disability who looked like he could have been out of The Sopranos, The guy had the hair back, the three-piece suit. It was a wonderful evening of community. Anyway, just made me laugh.
And I wanted to also ask you, the film world premiered at Sundance, which was one of the last times the whole cinema industry and also a big audience could gather before the pandemic hit. Talk to us about the challenges of that, and how sometimes what able-bodied expect of people who are contributing significantly to a film, that travel and all of those expectations around the showing of a film, that we all need to kind of use our activist voice to change. So I'd love to hear you talking about the experience of getting the film out into the world and to the right audience in the right way.
Well, we could talk for a couple of hours just on this one subject. And we had an incredible backer who said, when he first contacted, he says, I want to get the kids from the film out to Sundance. And I understood what he meant, but we're all like in our 60s, we're not kids anymore. But his incredibly generous gift, along with the support from Sundance and Netflix, we had a number of people from the film there. And the discussions were very, very meaty. Like, we're opening at the Eccles Theater, which is a beautiful theater, but there's just wheelchair seating throughout the theater. And so, we asked, well, other film crews, they all sit together, right? We would like to do that too. And they wound up ripping out some seats in this in this area so that we could all sit together on opening night. And and I just think that they really embraced making sure that we had an experience that wasn't held back because we had disabilities.
Yeah, it was a journey, nothing like this had actually happened before at Sundance, I don't think. But this number of wheelchair users, coming and attending every screening between the folks in the film and the journalists. There was a really great program that was providing some support for journalists with disabilities to come and attend the festival. And then there were audience members from the local community and beyond, who were coming out to see the film. And so it was overwhelming and a little bit, sad to think that this was so groundbreaking, here in 2020, that this really hadn't ever happened before. And people were talking to me a lot about it and saying like, well, gosh, why do they usually only have 4 accessible seats in a cinema, you know? And is it because people don't want to come because they're not sure if they will get a seat and they're not sure if, you know, it will be a good experience for them? And, you know, it's like, yes, actually. And then we had our own journey around closed captioning when we had the closed captioning devices that were used at the festival malfunctioned, and we had an incredible local deaf activist who was going to be moderating and speaking on a panel following this huge screening, and she wasn't actually able to see the film because the devices malfunctioned. And she said to us, you know, why didn't you just show it with open captions? And we were completely caught off guard. You know, we thought, oh, well, it's good we have closed captions and it's good we have the devices. And she said, well, would you want to watch a movie with, you know, like having to look down at a little device all the time? And so, you know, it was quite wonderful in that Netflix and Sundance and us all got together and had a open caption version delivered so that the following screenings of the film could all be shown with open captions. And we've continued to do that at festivals moving forward. But for us, like it was humbling to kind of be reminded that, you know, this is just like an ongoing journey for everyone. And even if you think you are doing access right, you're not going to be, you know, all the time. We've sort of adopted a philosophy that we try to be as responsive as we can to, you know, when we learned that, you know, deafblind people needed a transcript in order to experience the film, we were able, you know, Jim actually advocated for Netflix to create one, and they did. And, you know, this amazing deafblind writer and activist, Tobin Gurma, said it was the first Netflix film she'd ever watched, you know, encountering that transcript. So, yeah, wherever we can, we're trying to do that. But I think it's a philosophy that that will carry forward into future projects, and that, yeah, that we hope will spread.
I wanted to add one thing to this, you know, especially since we've all been in lockdown. You know, my wife always has the captions on when we watch Netflix. And I think that as people get more used to it, you know, you got other people in your friends or whatever that also use it, that it becomes a little bit more commonplace. And that I know that I've heard from people that, you know, if you do have an open caption screening and you advertise it, people will come. The deaf community will. It's very, very tight. Everybody communicates, and it's like, you know, oh my gosh, we have a chance to go out to watch a film, and it's going to be open caption. It's good business.
Lindsey, I wanted to bring you in, and then I'd like to introduce another colleague, pick up this topic actually. Able-bodied filmmakers fly into a festival, fly to a country to promote a film. Mainly they're worrying about, is the sound good and does it look okay on the big screen? They don't have to think about the challenges of showing. You do. I just wanted to pick up, just carry that thought on, really, that you know, it's also a big project that you have to take on.
Can't hear you, Lindsey.
Classic mistake. Sorry, everyone. It really speaks to what Nicole said. Even if we're part of this community or we're making work as part of this community, it is a journey and we don't always get it right. And I've certainly been in a position with films that I've been involved in where we haven't managed to afford and plan for and budget for and schedule for making captions in time for the world premiere. And obviously that's something that feels devastating when you're doing it. And it's really important to be able to talk to colleagues in industry, whether disabled or non-disabled, and acknowledge, you know, that journey, and sort of, I think, be kind to each other. And You know, I think a really exciting opportunity is that captioning and audio description are actually a creative opportunity. They're not just things that you throw on at the end because you have to. You know, audio description is about describing what's on screen visually. What an incredibly useful process to go through as someone who's trying to use all the tools of cinema to tell a visual story. You know, captioning is dependent on really, you know, it's about portraying what's being said. And I think part of any wonderful edit is about taking away the, you know, too much of what's being said and letting storytelling do its work visually, not just in sort of endless speech. So I think there's starting to be an awareness that captioning and audio description are things that we can plan for because they enhance our storytelling, not just because they're things that some people need. And that feels, you know, like a something to work together towards, so that funders are aware of that and are supporting those costs in budgets, so that exhibitors are aware of that and actually provide, you know, if you make your accessible versions of your film, then someone has to agree to show them. And well, how glorious would it be if, you know, every Sundance there were 3 screenings of a film and one of them was audio described and one of them was captioned. Nobody loses out that way, you know, everybody gains. So
seamless segue to introduce Toki Allison, who runs Inclusive Cinema in the UK and is our Access and Inclusion Manager at Birds Eye View as well. And you spend your life thinking about these challenges, Toki. I just wanted you to respond to this point and ask Jim and Nicole a question too around this.
Hi. Well, thanks for making a really important and incredible film initially, and yeah, thanks for having a chat with me as well. Yeah, I think, I mean, particularly this year, now that we've come coming through COVID. Sorry if you can hear my dog moaning in the background. It doesn't leave my side. I think we've noticed, certainly in the UK, that there's, you know, obviously cinemas are in a really tricky, precarious position at the moment, opening and closing. And that overall provision of screenings is reduced, which means certainly provision of captioned screenings is reduced, and adapted screenings as well. So we offer quite a lot of autism friendly or dementia friendly screenings in the UK at various independent cinemas, and those have also been reduced as well because of the situation that we're in. We're also hearing stories now of like distributors that would normally be providing captions as a standard and as a default have started to reduce their provision of even having the versions, so that cinemas who want to screen aren't able to. So I guess my preoccupation at the moment is a worry about going backwards, about losing access where we've been making ground, where we've been moving forward. I mean, slowly and too slowly, but yeah, so it's kind of frustrating and worrying. And there have been, I guess, issues as well where we've seen sort of health and safety legislation butting up against the Equality Act in the UK, and guidance kind of coming out that, you know, sort of pits one against the other, and doesn't always, you know, rest on the side of deaf, disabled and neurodiverse people. And I think, although there's some really great campaigns happening in the UK around kind of inclusive recovery and how we can do this better, there's no denying that disabled people are the most hard hit by COVID. And I think I want to kind of see a new shape for how we come out of this, a kind of a better culture and a more, you know, and not just go back to like business as usual as it was before, but want to see something that's more inclusive, that's stronger, that's more culturally inclusive, that's just a better experience for everybody, really. So I guess my question to you guys is, you know, as the filmmakers and as through your lived experience of putting this together and your lived experience of the CRIP camp is, you know, where do you see things going now, and kind of how is, I guess, the experience in the States, how could that inform what's happening here in terms of the best next steps to kind of, yeah, to make better experiences for audiences and just generally a better culture? That's a very big, demanding question, but these are the things that I rattle through in my brain, I suppose. Be interested to hear your thoughts.
I think I'm seeing a real sea change at the moment, that all of us have struggled for many years to be part of the diversity and inclusion discussions that have been so important for years, that often people who are deaf or disabled or neurodiverse are just not even part of all of this. We're seeing this more, and I'm really heartened that the Motion Picture Academy, the Oscar people, have made a series of videos where they've interviewed people with disabilities and kind of talking about working in the industry and the things that we need, so that there's a recognition from that very, very important organization that we need to be represented, and represented well, and more often. So I'm going to hold on to that. It makes me really sad to think that things are slipping backwards in the UK. But really, but I'm holding on to this hopefulness, and let me leave it at that. Nicole, your mic.
Thank you. Sorry. I think we've experienced that there is so much power in kind of the framing of a question to people in this time where so many people genuinely do want to be inclusive, and really genuinely don't have deaf and disabled people on their radar when they say that, for instance, well, we were going to have 3 screenings of this film, and one was going to be captioned, but we can only have 1 screening, so there won't be a captioned screening. We've been able to say to festivals, no, you have to have an inclusive screening, so you're going to have that 1 screening be a captioned screening, and we've been successful. In fact, it's been surprising to me, the lack of resistance to it, actually, so I do feel like there's a cultural moment that can be leveraged right now. At least in the US, it really feels that way. And my hope is people will get used to it. People that like Jim said about, Sarah watching Netflix with the captions on, and that these accommodations just become something that become a part of the mainstream viewing experience. I'll just never forget, after that story I told you about the open captions, that activist who wasn't able to see the film asked a question of us in a Q&A. She said, if I can't get in to see films, then how am I going to start to see myself as a filmmaker, And so I just think that, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but like these things have such ongoing ripple effects, throughout people's lives. And so it feels really imperative that we seize this moment in time and push these changes through now.
Wonderful, thank you. There's been a lot of great audience responses, people representing us with disabilities and as able-bodied, saying about how inspirational they have found the film. And I wanted to go back, and beautiful and moving, and an authentic experience. And I wanted to ask to go back to the filmmaking, actually, and how, the choices, if you can talk a bit about the choices, picking up on Jim's point about hope. There's a lot of hope in the film. It's incredibly inspiring. It's also very activating as an activist myself. I think for all of us, it's very inspiring, the activism journey. But it's also very hard hitting as well. And I just wanted to ask you how you kind of came to that kind of blend.
Well, we always knew we wanted to have that kind of blend. I would say that I was excited about working with Jim because I knew that any film that Jim was involved with would be like that. Jim has, used humor in his activism and engagement, ever since I've known him, in such a delightful way, and music and culture and joy and dancing and all of these things. And so the fact that the camp experience was full of that, and that the community is full of that, and that the community's particular, just completely incredible sense of humor, was going to be part of the film was one of the exciting things and one of the goals from the get-go was to just infuse the film full of that. Jim used to say to me, we've got to make a film that leaves people feeling like, if they see a person with a disability, they want to have a beer with them. And we felt like, it can be such an amazing kind of party in the disability community. And we wanted people to know that and feel like sort of infectious spirit of that, and as we were discussing before, really to like pull away from the maudlin and the tragic and the inspirational and the pity and all the things that we usually find. So that was very important to us, and kind of how we found the balance of it was by trial and error across a lot of time. There was that moment where Judy says, if I have to be thankful for an accessible bathroom, when am I going to really feel equal in the community? That was a moment that we really needed in order to come down off the high of the 504 sit-in victory, but to propel ourselves into the future with a realistic sense of the fact that this was not just, yes, it's inspirational that this victory was won, but we couldn't afford to leave viewers thinking that the struggle was over, or that society's misperceptions and bias wasn't still a problem. And so we would, like that moment, that tiny piece of archive fell in our laps almost at the very end of the filmmaking. And so a lot of it was kind of just like searching and trying and working and finding our way towards where did we need a moment that would, kind of be a gut punch, and then kind of grabbing people by the hand and pulling them forward through humor and joy.
I can't add anything more to that.
We have just gone past the hour, so I would like to say thank you to Jim and Nicole for your amazing film, for your wonderful words of wisdom, and for your continued journey with this film. We wish you the absolute best. We're there all the way. Everyone, please tell everyone to go and see CRIP CAMP. I'd like to thank Toki, Alison, and Lindsey Dryden for your wonderful contributions and for your really important work and solidarity with everyone. Thank you so much to our BSL signers, and have a lovely evening, a lovely day for those of you on the West Coast. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great to be here.